All right. Welcome to Unscripted, hosted by Harness. I'm Chris Cummings, Senior Director of Architecture from Tyler Technologies. I'm here to give a presentation called From Hero to Zero Effort, Simplifying CD. What does From Hero to Zero Effort mean? I kind of want to show you how you don't have to be a hero when it comes to deployment. And you can, just kind of kick back and let Harness handle all the heavy lifting. Also want to show how you can start off small and evolve your DevOps to become more sophisticated incrementally over time. But first, hey, what's up? I'm Chris. I want to give a little introduction myself. I've been working at Tyler Technologies since 2003. I started straight out of college in our courts and justice division, worked there for about 14 years, and have been working for the CTO of our company for the past 3 years in a cross-divisional capacity. And really what my team's doing is we're helping other teams in division modernize into the cloud. So you might have never heard of Tyler Tech, which is not a surprise. We're not really in the consumer space that much. We're purely focused on government. We do have some citizen-facing stuff you might have seen in the past, but really we have around like 100 plus government applications that span from the city to federal level, and we have installations in 16 countries. That includes about 26,000 plus implementations across 10,000 different jurisdictions. And that stuff's hosted in about 5,000 to 6,000 on-premise client networks and on-premise in our data centers on thousands of VMs. A lot of this stuff is older. We've been in business a while. A lot of these apps were started in the 2000s. We had a tendency to be mostly a Microsoft shop back then. We were a gold partner. So, we kind of started off on this cloud journey with a lot of monolithic Windows apps running behind IIS. And then our job on our team and with the CTO is basically how do we move and build a strategy to move all this stuff to the cloud? So, I'm going to try to keep this high level just for the sake of time, but I really kind of wanted to go over a high level plan. Really, like I said before, we're starting with monolithic apps, a lot of those running on Windows. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but back probably late 2017, we're trying to come up with a strategy. And, even back then we saw that it was heading towards microservices, containers, Kubernetes was going to be a big deal. And we really wanted to move off Windows onto Linux, right? So, we kind of started off down that road. We, got all of our stuff running in containers, Linux containers, running great on our local machine with Docker Compose, etc. But then, we wanted to start deploying this to a Kubernetes environment. So, we started thinking about deployment quite a bit. So really what I'm going to kind of do now is not really focus on the code or any of the things about necessarily transitioning, but really my team's job is to focus on this part on the left and, kind of build a strategy, ecosystem, put that in place. So not only can we kind of drain these monoliths into containers, but also, get this up as quickly as possible so all of our greenfield apps can start building apps this way as well, right? So, not an unpopular strategy across the industry. So really phase 0, when we wanted to deploy for the first time, was pretty basic. Tell me if you've seen this before. I mean, we literally set up a Kubernetes cluster and we're pushing all of our stuff with YAML files in the console with kube control apply F. Obviously this is not going to be a sustainable way to do that going forward, but I would suggest everyone that's getting into Kubernetes start here. It's going to help you understand everything, all the different abstractions you have available to you, etc. What we learned Obviously, the solution is not going to scale to the 1,200 plus software engineers we have across Tyler. Duh, right? We've been researching some of the stuff you want to do when you do deployments on containers, and we wanted to do some kind of blue-green, rolling, or canary deployment style thing. And the other thing we kind of learned, and this one's kind of funny, drive-by emails from a salesperson are not always bad, especially if they're from Harness. For some reason, I just happened to look at one of these hundreds of emails I get every month from salespeople at tech companies, and it piqued my curiosity, and then enter Harness. So we got hooked up with Harness. We were really early. I don't know what number. We were a really early customer. And so we set up a POC, and it was early 2018. This is just kind of, a very high level diagram of how our POC was set up. Couple of things to mention. If you look down in the bottom left here, I kind of started at our auto build service. Back then, we had already had a bunch of internal tools set up, and really we're trying to get this cloud stuff going as quickly as possible. So we were like, hey, why not use some of these tools we're already here? We'll try to keep these tools loosely coupled, and we can replace them in the future, right? So, we weren't a big fan of TeamCity or anything. It's like bad Jenkins. So we just kind of went ahead, we were publishing our containers to Docker Hub. We just added another build step on the end of our build to publish the webhook trigger to Harness. That, obviously sent the deploy commands to our AKS cluster. We were using Azure back then. Which, the deployments cause the containers to pull, the stuff runs. We didn't really have a logging strategy, aggregation strategy back then. So a couple of days before Harness showed up, we, just threw Beats log aggregator in our cluster, threw up Elasticsearch. But, once they were there, within 5 or 6 hours, we had a couple of our services deploying with Harness, hooked up to basic CV, etc. A couple of things we learned from that is we loved all the abstractions and how they built out the pipelines and workflows in Harness, and we didn't want to replicate that ourselves. And then obviously Elasticsearch was definitely not going to be our monitoring logging solution. We just realized we were going to have to put too much work into building that going forward. Phase 2 really was kind of between early 2018 and late 2018. Really, this was kind of our first kind of production run. As you can see, we're still on Azure here. We actually had another cluster that we built out of the ACS engine, which was a hybrid Windows Linux cluster. That became very unstable, as you could probably imagine. This was real early in the container days in the cloud. Etc. So, we had a lot of fun with that. We switched our logging to App Insights, but, quickly learned that was, we wanted something a little better there and more robust. Like I said before, at least back then, we haven't used them in a while. Windows containers are the devil, right? We had a couple of things still left that we hadn't converted yet. We probably should have just ran those on VMs. Like I was saying before, we realized App Insights was a temporary solution. And then, we had some engineers that kind of set up that other cluster. They were pretty gung-ho, showed some initiative, got it all set up, but we forgot to kind of show them the templatize button. So, oopsie on our part on that. So they ended up replicating a lot of workflows, copying them, etc. Phase 3. So kind of this stage was pretty important. Something happened within the business before this started. As our strategy to move into the cloud, we were talking to different cloud providers. I mean, we started off in Azure just because we had been like a Microsoft shop, a gold partner, etc. But we ended up actually partnering with AWS. to make a long story short. And, that started, of course, our transition to AWS from Azure. So one of the cool things about that is we were using Harness. A lot of this deployment stuff was already abstracted away. So it was pretty easy to just repoint to a different cloud connector, Kubernetes cluster, et cetera. And all of our pipelines, et cetera, still worked. A little later, after we initially moved, we did go back through and take advantage of all the template stuff, and we took the number of workflows down drastically. Obviously, from this picture, you can see on the left here, we settled in on Datadog as our logging, APM, infrastructure metrics tool, and started pumping some of that APM back into Harness for some basic CV. And even at the time, I think we were using their Service Guard 24/7. Couple of things that this was working out pretty well for us for a while, but using these tools like TeamCity, and for source control, we were using Bitbucket, which was internally hosted as well, was starting to cause us some issues. It was mostly around, like, a lot of people on our team were on Mac OS and Linux, and our company had traditionally been a Windows shop. So, we had issues with VPN to get into some of these tools. Our Linux guys were not supported at all. And it just became a hassle for us, right? So we started thinking, hey, we're going to get off of these internal tools, and we're going to get on purely managed SaaS tools for our DevOps infrastructure ecosystem, right? So, basically the same setup here. We basically just pulled out AKS and dropped in EKS, like I was saying before, real simple. And same thing with the Datadog on the logging, APMs, et cetera. Real easy to set up. Don't build this stuff yourself is my advice to you. So what do we learn from this? Like I pointed out before, 3 workflow templates is better than 60. Datadog really kind of gave us all the tooling and stuff we had been looking for. It was all correlated together, which we really liked as well. Using some of the internal tools and how we kind of had our setup, it was stopping us from taking advantage of some of the features in Harness, like some of the GitOps type stuff. And then we also learned, when you keep these tools as loosely coupled as possible, it makes them easier to change, right? So it allows your ecosystem to evolve and, change over time as your needs change. Phase 4, 2020. So, like I mentioned before, we were already kind of on this no VPN thing. We even had a hashtag no VPN initiative that we've had running. And then, the pandemic happened, which, all these people that were going to the office and just had access to the tools because they were on the network now had issues with VPN, et cetera. So we just pushed forward even harder on the no VPN effort. And then on top of that, we had been talking about doing a lot of automation around the infrastructure, disaster recovery, et cetera. We had been doing a lot of game days with AWS, and we were trying to shore up, just the reliability, high availability of our system, et cetera. So let's take a look at what we ended up here. This is pretty cool, actually. So, as you can see from the picture, we got a little more sophisticated here. On the build and source control side, we got rid of all of our internal tools, and we moved to GitHub and GitHub Actions for build. We were using Docker Hub, and then we also had an internal tool called ProGit that we're storing a lot of our NuGet, NPM, other style packages on as well. We consolidated all of that into JFrog Artifactory. We settled on using Terraform for a lot of our infrastructure automation and everything. And then, we kind of took a step back and looked at how, how could all of this stuff fit together, and, what's the best way to organize this ecosystem, right? So not only do we use Harness to automate deployment, et cetera, we can use Terraform to change configs in our cluster. We've also built some stuff into Terraform to automate creating and triggering deployments from Harness from Terraform. And then, obviously, like standard Terraform stuff, we're using it to build out our AWS automation. So one of the first things we did with this is we built it out to do a complete region recovery if we had a region failure in AWS. So, with this system that we set up, we can have a complete region failure in AWS and come up in another region, I think, in 22 to 25 minutes. So I'll just kind of walk through how that works, just because it's kind of interesting. One of the cool things we've done is we've taken advantage of a lot of the GitOps style stuff with Terraform. So anything we trigger in Terraform is really someone changing something in GitHub, and that will trigger automation in Terraform. So to kind of walk through the flow, because I know this is kind of complicated, of how like a region restore would work, is someone would go into GitHub for our config for this environment. They would add another region/environment. This is going to turn into an environment in Harness later. They would submit a PR to change that configuration in GitHub, and through the OAuth app, it'll go ahead and run that there's a OAuth Terraform app integration that we use. This will go ahead and run the plan when someone submits a PR and check to make sure it's a valid plan. Once that PR is accepted, it will trigger the Terraform thing. And the first thing we do is we go into GitHub and we add an environment to all the apps through the GitOps stuff that we're using with Harness. That causes a webhook trigger to go off and causes the Git sync to happen. Harness is now configured with the new environment pointing at the new region. We then tell actually, let me take a step back. The very, very first thing that happens is we run all this AWS infrastructure. That sets up this. I know I have this separate up here. It sets up EKS, et cetera. And then it triggers, adding the environment, which then causes the webhook trigger, the Git sync to happen. Harness is now configured. We wrote a little executable to trigger from Terraform that will go and trigger all the deployments of our services in the correct order, dependency order. Just a little custom thing we wrote that's custom to us. And then, that'll kick off all the services running, all the automation, set up all the Datadog thing, and then, within 22 minutes, we're up and running. A couple of things to mention here is we built some Terraform modules. We built a GitOps one that'll allows you to easily change stuff in Git. Like I said, we built that custom executable there, built on the GraphQL API that Harness provides. And then we also built a GraphQL, Terraform module, Terraform provider that allows you to easily connect to GraphQL things. Cool thing about that is we're cleaning those up a little bit, and we're going to open source that. So if you want to try to do something like this, we're going to open source that. We've built a lot of modules on top of those providers. They're really targeted towards how we have Harness organized, but maybe we can throw some examples out there and help people out if you're interested. Couple of things we learned from this. Automation is awesome. Automation is your friend. Automate early, automate often, right? Once we started putting in a lot of this automation and we kind of built all the pieces now where we're going to be able to automate creating apps and all kinds of stuff and harness, Git, etc. I mean, this is just feels like the piece we were missing. So, anything you can automate, automate. We found out, using GitHub in a GitOps fashion for deployment and infrastructure automation is pretty slick. Just like you saw in the previous thing, we're doing our AWS infrastructure. If we wanted to upgrade our EKS cluster to the new version of Kubernetes, you go into GitHub, you upgrade the version, that you create a PR, someone approves it, that gets pushed out, your cluster gets updated, right? And really what that does for you is GitHub kind of becomes the system of record for the state of your system, right? And you get to change that state through the normal PR process that we're all familiar with, that we all know and love, right? Some of the future things we're planning on doing, we're looking at some different management tools for automation, managing runbooks and incident response, and kind of tying some of this stuff together a little bit better into a more kind of cohesive ecosystem. And then, kind of as we've started out, and Tyler's been new to this cloud thing, we've built out the cluster and we've hosted a bunch of different app teams. Now we're starting to bring some of our larger apps that have millions of lines of code. We're trying to make those cloud native, microsystem, Kubernetes, running on Linux, like I said before. We're going to explore setting up some additional clusters and have multi-cluster, multi-system support from some of this automation, harness, etc. All right. Quick little bonus. One thing we recently did as well is we've got Harness CE hooked up, which has been really helpful for us. As you can see from these little bars here, each one of these represents kind of an app team or division that's using our cluster to host their applications. I did kind of blank out the names of the applications here down at the bottom, protect the innocent. But as you can see, this gives us a good idea of who's using what resources. As you can see too, some of the slices are bigger than others. Some teams are further ahead, right? And they've got more stuff in the cloud. Moving forward, this has been really great, helping us manage our cost. And we've even brought some app teams down that have paused, et cetera, based on stuff we've learned from this, right? A couple of other things I want to do is give some shout outs. So the team that's really kind of been putting together the most of this harness stuff over the past 3 years is the team I have listed here. We have Sammy, Mark, Mukta, Tyler. They're awesome. They've designed a lot of this, put a lot of work and effort, and have evolved this over time. Sammy and Mark are on my team. Mukta and Tyler are on Jason Howard's team, one of the fearless leaders over here. I'm also one of the fearless leaders, and then obviously our CTO, Jeff Green, who me and Jason work for, he's the fearless leader of fearless leaders. Another couple of special thanks I'd like to throw out there. Matt Bartell and Joe Nunley, they were moving all of that stuff out of Bitbucket and Team City as the team was working on all the Terraform, automation, disaster recovery, failover stuff. Even Mark Graves was training different teams. So it's really been a whole team effort across the board on this. And then, obviously we want to thank Harness. That kind of concludes my presentation. A little additional info here for everyone involved. Hey, visit our open source GitHub organization. We're open sourcing these projects soon, and they'll be up there. So, if you liked kind of how we had our ecosystem set up and you want to do something similar, hey, we might have some tools to help you there. Also, hey, check out Tyler's website. You'll find out we build all kinds of stuff. You've probably never heard of us. We're hiring all the time. We have offices all across the country, etc. It's a great place to work. Also, if you want, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to post jobs when we have openings on our team. So, if you want to keep an eye out and come join Tyler and help us, bring government into the cloud, we'd love to have you. Also, I want to thank everyone in Harness for having me here and letting me give this talk, and appreciate all y'all's time for listening. Thank you.